We're going to now kind of come into the closing portion of Hebrews 11. So let me switch over there. Hebrews 11, verse 1 said, "Now faith is the substance, it's the essence of hope. It's the substance of the things being hoped for, of things that will be, that are not yet, but are certain to be." That's what biblical hope is. And faith is the substance of that, is substantially that, trusting in God in the midst of what you don't see. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of realities not seen, or that are invisible. You haven't experienced them yet, haven't seen it. For by it, the elders, those who've gone before us, received commendation, or they were testified concerning their faith. The Bible has spoken, the scriptures have spoken. The witness has reached our ears concerning their faith. And he goes through Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, right? And he's going through and he's saying, hey, they didn't receive it in the promise, they died before receiving the promise, and yet they weren't looking for something that's temporal. They were looking for a city whose architect and whose builder is God. They were looking for something beyond. They were looking past the immediate moment to that which is to come. We looked yesterday at the walls of Jericho. He talked about Rahab, and then he begins now to kind of say, where I could go on and on, right? Verse 32, he says, what more shall I say? I could keep going. Time would fail me if I tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and also David and Samuel and the prophets. This could get really long. And so now we're hitting this portion that begins to address the expressions of their faith, the living out of their faith in tangible, but in kind of general ways. So some are general, some are specific. We come to verse 33 today. He says, by faith, through their faith. And so the language is kind of different here, because up until now it's been by faith in piste in Greek. Here it says hoi dia pisteos, which is those who through faith, the ones who through their faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, right? And so the recognition in terms of the things they conquered kingdoms, not in their own strength, but what? Through trust in the Lord. Their victories were not of their own power or their own might, right? When you talk about the walls of Jericho yesterday, those walls fell not because of their prowess, military prowess, but because of their trust in the Lord's command. In Joshua 1:9, the Lord said, "Have I not commanded you? Chazak, be strong. Do not be terrified or dismayed." Why? Not because of your strength, not because of your might, not because there's not something to be terrified of if it's just you. Yeah, on your own, there's something to be afraid of. He says, but don't be afraid, for Adonai your God is with you wherever you go. And the Lord goes before them. So in terms of conquering kingdoms, the celebration in that is it's in response. It's the Lord. They conquered kingdoms because of their faith, their trust, in their obedience to the Lord. The administration of justice, right, of righteousness. That was an active expression of trust in God, of living out through their faith, living out the things that God had said. And so you have this expressed in the Psalms, and there's the coronation psalm of Psalm 101, where David is making this commitment about ruling over the land and in a way that is glorifying to God, in a way that brings about God's righteousness and his justice. When you read Psalm 72 and David is praying over his son, the way his son will be king, there's a desire to see the justice, the character of God displayed in the way that the kings of Israel lead the nation, the way they govern those who've been entrusted to them. That this is an expression of trust in God. 2 Samuel 8:15, David reigned over all Israel, and David executed justice and righteousness for all the people. Concerning Solomon, 1 Kings 10:9, blessed be Adonai your God, who delighted in you to set you on the throne of Israel. It is because of Adonai's everlasting love for Israel that he made you king to do justice and righteousness, right? So they conquered kingdoms, they administered justice, they obtained promises, and this is all the way through. We see in Joshua 21, verses 43 to 45. So Adonai gave to Israel the entire land that he had sworn to their fathers to give to their fathers. They took possession and settled in it. And then Adonai gave them rest on all sides, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one man of all their enemies withstood them, for Adonai gave all their enemies into their hand. Verse 45, not one good thing that Adonai had promised to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass. Right, because of what he had done through them trusting in him, obeying him, following him by faith. By faith, they obtained promises. Those who through faith shut the mouths of lions, right? Of course, this is one of the more famous stories that where we know it in cartoon form. And I've told this before. Years ago, when we lived in Missouri, we were in Branson, and we went to this Kirby Van Birch, illusion show, and he had tigers and all this. And so we got to go backstage afterward to see the tigers, and the tigers are thankfully, behind these glass or plexiglass or whatever, something strong. And he's telling us about the tigers, and there's one in there, and full grown, but only 2 years old. Her name's Princess. And he goes, that's Princess. She's 2 years old or whatever. And my wife is by there, and she looks at the glass. She goes, "Oh, hi, Princess." And in like a flash, faster than I've ever seen anything, Princess was up, claws on the glass, like mouth open. It was the fastest thing I'd ever experienced, and we were just terrified, and we were very thankful for that glass. And when you think about being in a den of hungry lions, of actual lions, not cartoon lions, but they're right there, to trust God in the midst of that, was incredible. And so by faith, Daniel, in Daniel 6:23 says, my God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths so that they haven't harmed me, because I was found innocent before him. Nor have I committed any crime against you, O king. So by faith, all of these things happen. Verse 34, it says, if those who through faith quench the power of fire, right? So of course that's pointing to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel 3:25. He says, he answered saying, look, I see 4 men walking about unbound and unharmed in the middle of the fire. And the fourth has the appearance like a son of the gods. Again, we know the story. We know they come out of the other side of it. But they walked into that saying, look, our God is able to deliver us from this fire. But even if he doesn't, we won't bow. They're trusting in the command of the Lord. They're trusting in what God had said. Those who through faith quenched the power of the fire. Those who through faith escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, and made foreign armies flee. So this is very general. I mean, how many were made strong in their weakness? I mean, he's already referred to Gideon, but in terms of became strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, and made foreign armies flee. Well, you could see that all the way through. God, that's the way God does it. He chooses the weak things in order to shame the wise, right? I mean, that's the way that God operates. We see we see that in Gideon. We see that in many. It's interesting, actually. I found this really fascinating. Clement of Rome, who was, he's a first century believer, who he died in the year 99. So this was all very fresh to him, and he actually was familiar with the book of Hebrews, which again would make you wonder if well, he's familiar, like in terms of the Italian, the Jewish Italians, or the Italian, anyway, the Jews in Italy that had been expelled, if they had been the original recipients of this book. But Clement of Rome, he had studied this book, and he attempted in his writings to identify some of the heroes of the faith who were mentioned here anonymously. And so concerning the words, had their weakness turned to strength, he comments, he says, many women have been made strong through the grace of God and have accomplished many deeds of valor. And he goes on to talk about Esther, and he goes on to talk actually about Judith. There's a book, extra canonical book of Judith that's actually, I wasn't aware that it's in the Septuagint. It's not in the Hebrew canon, but it's in the Septuagint, which is interesting. But he goes on to mention Judith, and what he says of Judith, he says, he says that these words came true of her. She became mighty in war, put armies to flee. The blessed Judith, he says, when her city was besieged, asked the elders to let her go into the camp of the aliens. So, exposing herself to danger, she went out for love of her country and people when they were being besieged, and the Lord delivered Holofernes into the hand of a woman. And I could tell you more about the story, except I don't really know this story, so I want to become more familiar with it. And then there are those who have pointed out that this passage even could apply to the Maccabees, whose weakness was made strong out of weakness. They became mighty in war, made foreign armies to flee. We'll go into verse 35. It says, women received their dead raised back to life. And he uses the word anastaseos, they resurrected, raised back to life, revived. And, you know, in the Hebrew scriptures, you've got with the widow at Zarephath, whose son was raised to life, and you've got the Shunammite widow, or not widow, Shunammite woman, whose boy was raised to life in 2 Kings 4. So the first one is 1 Kings 17, and the other one is in 2 Kings 4. And of course, that's one of the great stories where, without going fully into it, you know, where when her son has died, and she's going to find the prophet, going to find Elisha, and she's saying, it is well, you know, how is it? It is well. And she's trusting in God. God gave her this son. She said, I told you, don't promise this to me. And now the boy has died, and God gave her this son, and she's trusting in God. By faith, those who through faith, women received their dead back to life. And others, it says, were tortured after not accepting release, so they might obtain a better anastaseos, a better resurrection. So some women received their dead back from life. Others were tortured and didn't accept release, so that they might receive, and here's another instance of better, kretos. It's a better resurrection. The particular form of the verb tortured, those who were tortured, tumpanizo, it indicates this Greek verb that speaks of being stretched on a frame and being beaten to death, which was precisely the punishment that was meted out in the books of the Maccabees to Eleazar. He was one of those who stood for the faith in the Maccabean days. In Second Maccabees, there's a story of a mother and her 7 sons, each of whom refused to deny the Lord, refused to bow, basically, and each of them refusing to accept release, refusing to, make that trade, died. And so in one of the story, it's like brother after brother, it declares his readiness to accept torture and death because of the hope of the resurrection. One of them in 2 Maccabees 7:9, one says to the king, "You accursed wretch, you dismiss us from the present life, but the King of the universe will raise us up to an everlasting renewal of life, because we have died for his laws." We've died for him. And so you have this imagery would have been in the minds of the believers that are hearing this. And so the resurrection to which they looked forward was better than the boys that were raised at Zarephath and Shunem, who, though they were raised by Elijah and Elisha, they were raised back to mortal life. Eventually, those boys died again, right? So the resurrection that those who who accepted torture and refused release because they were looking toward a better resurrection, were looking toward the resurrection toward eternal life. Verse 36, others experienced the trial of mocking and scourging. Yes, and even chains and prison. So those receiving this letter, now this is going to be very familiar to them. What would immediately come to mind are people that have gone before them, believers who have gone before them in their own community. I mean, he just talked in Hebrews chapter 10 of those among them who were imprisoned, those who were chained, those who were mocked. And those of you who weren't experiencing that, some of you entered into it with them voluntarily. And then the prophets come to mind. You've got Jeremiah. Jeremiah was beaten. He was humiliated, mocked, put in stocks and chains. His family turns on him. He's again beaten. He's put in prison where he's down in mud, and he's basically dying in the bottom of a well, and he's rescued by Ebed Melech, which is an Ethiopian servant, an Ethiopian there in the castle. And so here you have all that Jeremiah went through for the sake of the name, for the sake of the Lord's name. Verse 37, they were stoned, they were sawed in two, they were murdered with the sword, right? So previously, by faith, right? Look back in verse 34. By faith, those who through faith quenched the power of the fire, escaped the edge of the sword. By faith, they escaped the edge of the sword. Here, in verse 37, right? They were stoned, they were sawed in two, they were murdered with the sword. So which ones had faith? Some escaped by the edge of the sword. Some were murdered with the sword. They went around in sheepskins and goatskins. They were destitute, afflicted, and mistreated. Right? So the story of being sawn in two is the traditional story of what happened to Isaiah, and which was well known among the Jewish people, and to this day is well known, the tradition that he was sawed in two. And again, you have some who escaped the edge of the sword, right? Elijah escaped the edge of the sword from Jezebel. But you'll remember in 1 Kings 18 that there were many prophets. Of Obadiah speaks of having hidden away 100 prophets, and there were others who had been murdered, who had died, who hadn't escaped the edge of the sword. So you have some that escape the edge of the sword, some who don't. You have Jeremiah, right? Jeremiah wasn't killed by Jehoiakim, but we read when we went through Jeremiah in Jeremiah 26 that you have Uriah. That's not so fortunate. Uriah is preaching the same message, declaring the same word as Jeremiah, and Jehoiakim hunts him down and slays him with the sword. So it's not like, well, if you have faith, then it's always all going to be comfortable. It's always going to be good. Faith says we won't bow. We know that our God is able to save us from the fire. But even if he doesn't, We trust in his word. We won't turn on what he has said. We will hold firm. We're not going to bow to your idol, O Nebuchadnezzar. We're not going to stop declaring and speaking forth the love of God and the truth of God because of the word of God. It's interesting to me, this is a little aside that's very contemporary in the moment in which we live. All the controversy in our world right now surrounding vaccines and things like that, and there are those who don't want to take a vaccine because they have genuine concerns in general about different medicinal things, and I get that. I mean, I understand that. I mean, you'll be watching television and you'll watch one commercial about whatever the new wonder drug is, and the next commercial is a class action lawsuit against what the former wonder drug. So I understand those concerns, but then you have others who make the vaccine an issue of their faith in God or their trust in God, as though taking the vaccine is not trusting God, and they're making taking the vaccine equivalent to bowing to the idol of King Nebuchadnezzar. And the vaccine is not it's not a question of faith. It's not a question of not trusting God, right? That's not what that is. And so it's not the mark of the beast. So there's no need to make that an issue of I will not bow. You will. That's what people have made it into it, and that's. I don't find that to be valid. I find what's valid is when people have genuine concerns. So I wanted to point that out because I don't want people misusing this trust, saying by faith we will not bow, and they're doing this thing on this I stand. Whereas we're not to bow to the things of this world when we're selfish and when we're nasty and angry, and to me that's a bowing to the way of this world, more so than taking a vaccine is. I mean, any more than taking ibuprofen. So we take medicine. We're not like an anti-medicinal people. Anyway, that's an aside. If it's a personal concern, but don't let it become an issue of your walk with God, because it doesn't have to do. It's not the mark of the beast. But what you see through Scripture is you have people live and you have people die. You have Jacob, who is martyred by Herod, who's killed in Acts chapter 12, and then in the same chapter you have an angel deliver Peter. Did one have faith and one not have faith, or vice versa? No, by faith. Their trust was in God. Their trust is in God. And there are some times when God delivers in the way that we desire him to, and there are other times that he doesn't. And we don't determine whether or not we're going to continue to trust in him based on if he comes through in our timing and in our way. We put our trust in what we cannot see, and we're hoping for a better resurrection. There were those who were raised from the dead, who were raised to life. And then there were those who refused, who accepted torture and refused release, and they because they were looking forward to a better resurrection. And that's where our eyes are fixed on what the Lord has for us, on what is to be. Verse 39, and all these. So now this is the whole group, from Abel and Noah and Enoch and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Sarah and Moses and Joshua and Rahab and Gideon and Jephthah and Samson and David and Samuel and the prophets. All of these, and those who were raised to life, and those who those who died, those who wandered around in sheepskins and goatskins, those who were destitute for the sake of the name. All of these, those who were tortured, those who suffered, all of these, though commended for their faith, testified of by their faith, did not receive what was promised. None of them have received the fullness of the promise. Right? None of them have gotten the fullness because, verse 40, because God had provided, and the language here is problepsamenu, which is seeing toward. Blepo is to see, seeing toward. God saw, envisioned, gave us something to look toward, something better, kreton. Again, something, God had something better that for us to look toward, so that, now this is so that only with us would they reach perfection or telos, completion. But I want you to see, it doesn't actually say only with us. I actually prefer when I saw it in the original, in the Greek, I loved the way it said it better. It says here, it's hina mi choris hemon, in order that not without us, not just only with us, but not without us, they might be made complete. Like they are going toward the goal. They have not yet received the fullness of the promise. So that because there's a waiting, they didn't want to, I don't want to receive the promise without you. We are waiting so that you can be with us, not without us. Come on. We've not yet received the fullness of the promise. The Lord is slow in keeping his promise? No. He's not slow in keeping his promise, as some consider slowness. His desire is that none should perish, but that all should come to repentance. That the heart of God is to say, come on, everyone. And what's happening here is to this persecuted believing community that begins to wonder, where is God in the midst of my pain? Where is God in the midst of my suffering? And he says, listen, I want you to see beyond the moment, to trust what God has for you, to not die in the desert, to not be like those who died because they stopped trusting. Don't imitate them, right? But to imitate those who are inheriting the promises. They are inheriting the promises through trust and perseverance, right? Through trust and endurance. And so we are inheriting the promise. We've not yet fully inherited. They have not fully inherited, but we are inheriting the promises. And it's here it's saying, don't be left out. Don't let it, not without us. In order that not without us, there might be a fullness. That the desire is that lead into Hebrews chapter 12, where he says, therefore, since we're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, right? Don't fall down. Don't lay down. Don't quit now. You're almost there. Eyes on the prize, eyes on the goal, eyes on Yeshua, right? And if you look back in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 17, it said, therefore, Yeshua had to be made like his brothers. He became like his brothers in all things, so he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in matters relating to God, to make atonement for the sins of the people, because he himself suffered. He himself suffered when put to the test. So he is able to help those being tested. He is there. He is able to help those. It says also in the time that they need, when they call, he himself has suffered. You're not alone in suffering. You have all of these who've gone before us, all of these who in the moment, they couldn't see the fullness of the promise, but they trusted what God had said. And we hold firm to what God has said. We hold firm to him. Our trust is in him. And we're going to walk in his ways. So we spur one another on, right, toward love and toward good works. It says in Hebrews chapter 10, think about, consider, come on, how can you spur one another on toward love and good works? Spur one another on, that we are not those who quit, those who lay down, those who stop, those who go backward in our weariness, in the moments when you say, where is God in all of this? I don't understand. Where is God when I'm having to walk into a fiery furnace or get put into a lion's den? Where is God when the prophet is actually sawed in two? Where is God when, how come those boys got raised to life and then these ones didn't? Don't lose your trust in what God has said, God has spoken. There are times when for reasons and purposes that we can't understand, when God chooses to intervene, he chooses to heal. And then there are times when we call on him to heal and restore, and for reasons we don't understand in those moments, he doesn't. And our faith, our trust in him is not rooted in what we can see, but in what he has said. Right? That every healing here, those boys that were raised to new life, they died again. But there's a better resurrection. There's a better resurrection. There's a fuller healing. And there is so much brokenness in the world, and it's God's desire that none should perish. So our desire is to say, to be included in this, to be a part of this compendium of faith that says, not without us. You're not going without us. You're not receiving the promises without us. And that we keep enlarging the tent. Come on, more. Let's not without us. Let's inherit the promises that God has for us. Amen? May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.